If you have been feeling that strange numbness in your feet, that tingling that just won't go away, I need you to stop what you're doing right now and pay attention. Because what I'm about to share with you is something most doctors will never bring up in a routine appointment. And if you ignore it, the consequences are far more serious than you've been told. I've spent decades working with patients over 60, men and women who came to me frustrated, confused, and in pain. And one of the patterns I've seen destroy people's quality of life, silently, progressively, without warning, is peripheral neuropathy. Not because it's untreatable, but because by the time most people understand what's actually happening inside their nervous system, the damage has already been building for years. That is what I refuse to let happen to you today. So stay with me, because what I'm about to explain changes everything about how you think about that tingling, that burning, that numbness in your feet. Let me describe something, and I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. You wake up in the middle of the night, your feet feel like they're on fire. Not a dull ache, a burning sensation, deep in the soles, like someone is holding a flame just beneath the skin. You shift position, you put your feet on the cold floor. Maybe it eases for a moment, but then it comes back, and you lie there in the dark, wondering if this is just something you have to live with now, wondering if this is just getting old. Or maybe it's something else you recognize. You're walking across the kitchen and you don't feel the floor properly under your feet. It's not pain exactly. It's an absence. A numbness that makes every step feel slightly uncertain. You find yourself reaching for the counter, the wall, the back of a chair, not because you're dizzy, but because your feet aren't sending the right signals to your brain anymore. And deep down, that terrifies you. Because you know what happens to people who start falling, or maybe it's the tingling, constant low level like your feet fell asleep and never fully woke up. You've mentioned it to your doctor, and they told you it's normal for your age, or they gave you a prescription and sent you home. And here you are, still feeling it every single day, quietly getting worse. In my years working with patients over 60, I've heard this story hundreds of times, and every time I feel the same frustration. Not at the patient, but at a system that hands out medication without ever explaining what is actually going wrong inside their body. You deserve to understand what is happening. So let me tell you, your peripheral nerves, the ones that run through your legs, your feet, your hands, are like electrical wiring. They carry signals back and forth between your brain and your body. Now, every electrical wire has a protective coating around it. In your body, that coating is called myelin. It's a fatty sheath that wraps around each nerve fiber, insulating it, protecting it, allowing signals to travel cleanly and fast. When that myelin sheath is intact, you feel temperature, pressure, texture, pain, everything your brain needs to keep you balanced, coordinated, and safe. But here's what the research increasingly shows, and what most 10-minute appointments never cover. That protective sheath deteriorates. Not overnight, not dramatically. It erodes slowly, quietly, over years. And the signals start to break down. Think of an old electrical cord with the rubber coating worn away. The wire is still there, but the signal leaks. It distorts. Sometimes it sparks. That is exactly what peripheral neuropathy feels like from the inside. Tingling, burning, shooting pain, numbness, because the insulation on your nerve fibers is no longer doing its job. And here's what makes this even more serious, and I'll get to all the causes in just a moment. This process does not stop on its own. Without the right support, it progresses, stage by stage, year by year, and the people I've seen ignore it for too long always end up in the same place. In the early stages, you notice the tingling, maybe some burning at night, uncomfortable but manageable. Most people write it off. Then comes the numbness, a creeping loss of sensation that starts in the toes and moves upward. At this stage, you start compensating without realizing it. You walk differently. You hold on to things more. Your world quietly gets smaller. Then the balance problems begin. And this is where it becomes genuinely dangerous, because a person who cannot feel the ground properly under their feet is a person who falls. And I need you to understand something very clearly. Falls are the #1 cause of accidental death in adults over 65, not a statistic to gloss over. A reality I have watched unfold in the lives of patients I care deeply about. I had a patient, I'll call him Harold, 71 years old, retired teacher, a man who had spent his entire life active, independent, sharp. He came to me after 2 years of burning in his feet that had been dismissed as normal aging by 3 different physicians. He had been on gabapentin for over a year. It dulled the sensation slightly, but the underlying problem kept advancing. By the time I saw him, he had already stopped his evening walks. He had already given up gardening. He told me in a quiet voice that he had started holding the shower wall with both hands because he was afraid of falling. He wasn't afraid of the pain anymore. He was afraid of becoming a burden to his daughter. That fear is real. I hear it constantly. And it is not weakness. It is the honest recognition of what advanced neuropathy takes from a person. Their independence, their confidence, their sense of who they are. If what I'm sharing today is new to you, and I suspect it is, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I release critical health information for people over 60 every week. Information your doctor may not have time to share in a routine appointment. Hit the subscribe button below. It costs nothing, and it could be one of the most important health decisions you make today. Now let me tell you about what the research actually points to as the driving forces behind this nerve deterioration. Because this is where it gets important. The first and most significant factor is vitamin B12 deficiency. Methylcobalamin, the active form of B12, is the single most critical nutrient for myelin synthesis and maintenance. Your body cannot build or repair that protective nerve sheath without it. And here is what most people over 60 don't realize. The stomach's ability to absorb B12 from food declines significantly with age. Something called intrinsic factor, a protein produced in the stomach lining, becomes less abundant after 60, which means even if you eat well, you may be absorbing a fraction of the B12 you need. And this is where the research gets even more alarming. Studies suggest that up to 40% of adults over 60 are significantly deficient in B12. 40%. And for those taking metformin, one of the most commonly prescribed medications for blood sugar, the deficiency rate is even higher. Because metformin directly interferes with B12 absorption in the gut, researchers have observed reductions of up to 30% in B12 levels in long-term metformin users. Think about that. The very medication prescribed to protect you from diabetes complications may be silently accelerating the nerve damage that is the most devastating complication of all. And if you've tried B12 supplements before and didn't notice a difference, there's a reason for that too, and it matters enormously. The form of B12 found in most inexpensive supplements is called cyanocobalamin. It's synthetic, it's cheap, and clinical evidence increasingly points to the fact that it does not penetrate nerve tissue the way the body needs it to. The methylated form, methylcobalamin, is what the research consistently identifies as the bioavailable form that actually reaches the nervous system. Most people have never been told this difference exists. The second major factor is oxidative stress. Over decades, free radicals accumulate in the body, unstable molecules that damage cells, including the delicate cells of your peripheral nervous system. Standard antioxidants help in some tissues, but nerve cell mitochondria, the energy-producing structures inside each nerve cell, require something more targeted. Alpha-lipoic acid is one of the most extensively studied natural compounds for peripheral nerve support precisely because it works inside nerve cells, neutralizing oxidative damage where standard antioxidants simply cannot reach. Researchers have observed that alpha-lipoic acid crosses into the mitochondria of nerve cells in ways that make it uniquely relevant to this specific type of cellular damage. The third factor is inflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that doesn't show obvious symptoms but silently damages tissues over years, is now well established as a driver of peripheral nerve deterioration. Vitamin D plays a direct role in regulating this inflammatory response. And emerging research links vitamin D deficiency, which affects the vast majority of adults over 60, especially during winter months, to increased nerve sensitivity and pain. This connection between D deficiency and neuropathic symptoms is one of the most underappreciated findings in senior health research. Researchers at institutions studying peripheral neuropathy have also documented the role of magnesium in nerve signal regulation. Magnesium is involved in over 300 biological processes, including the function of calcium channels in nerve cell membranes. When those channels are dysregulated, which happens when magnesium levels drop, nerves become hyperexcitable. They fire when they shouldn't. They misinterpret signals. That hyperexcitability is experienced as tingling, shooting pain, and those violent nighttime cramps that wake you out of a deep sleep. And chronic magnesium deficiency in adults over 60 is far more prevalent than the conventional medical system acknowledges. There is also benfotiamine, the fat-soluble form of vitamin B1. Unlike standard thiamine, benfotiamine penetrates nerve tissue directly and has been studied for decades in European clinical settings settings, specifically for its role in protecting nerves from glucose-related damage. Even in people who are not formally diabetic but have elevated blood sugar or prediabetes, a condition that affects tens of millions of Americans who don't know it. Glucose damages the tiny blood vessels that supply the peripheral nerves. Benfotiamine has been documented as one of the most effective nutritional supports for this specific mechanism of nerve injury. I've put together a short presentation that goes much deeper into everything I've covered today. It includes specific approaches that I've seen work for patients in exactly this situation. The link is in the description below. Watch it when you have a quiet moment. I think it's going to answer a lot of questions you didn't even know you had. Let me come back to something important though, because the science matters. But what truly matters is what this condition takes from a person's life when it goes unaddressed. And I don't think we talk about this enough. When peripheral neuropathy progresses, it doesn't just affect your feet, it invades your sleep. Night after night of burning, cramping, and pain that wakes you at 2 in the morning, leaves you exhausted by day, foggy, short-tempered, depleted. And when you're sleep deprived for months on end, everything deteriorates. Your mood, your memory, your immune function, your relationships. The person you are starts to erode along with your nerves. It affects your confidence in public. People who once walked briskly through a grocery store now slow down, hesitant, watching the ground, dreading uneven pavement. They stop going to restaurants, to church, to family gatherings, because the effort and the fear are no longer worth it. The social isolation that follows is devastating. It is quiet, it is gradual, and it compounds every other loss. And then there is the deepest wound of all, the loss of the version of yourself you recognize. The person who got down on the floor to play with grandchildren, the one who danced at weddings, who tended the garden, who took evening walks without gripping someone's arm. That loss of physical self, the feeling that your body is no longer yours to trust, carries a grief that is very real, and that almost no one in the conventional medical system ever takes the time to name. This is not just about tingling in your feet. This affects everything: your sleep, your relationships, your sense of who you are, and you deserve to know that it does not have to end this way. What the research increasingly suggests is that the peripheral nervous system has a remarkable capacity to begin recovering when given the specific nutritional support it has been lacking. Not a magic reversal, not overnight, but a genuine, progressive restoration of the environment that nerves need to repair, remyelinate, and function again. I've watched patients who hadn't slept through the night in 2 years begin sleeping again. I've watched people who had stopped walking for pleasure begin walking again, not because they found a miracle, but because they finally gave their nervous system what it had been starving for. The reason your doctor has likely never discussed any of this with you is not malice. It's the structure of a system that is built around pharmaceutical intervention. A 10-minute appointment is designed to match symptoms to medications, not to investigate nutritional deficiencies, not to explain the difference between cyanocobalamin and methylcobalamin, not to discuss alpha-lipoic acid or benfotiamine. The system is not built for that conversation. And the result is that millions of people over 60 are suffering from something completely addressable because no one took the time to explain it. This is not a conspiracy. It is a system problem. And the result is that millions of people over 60 are suffering unnecessarily. You are not powerless here. Your nerves are not simply failing because of age. They are failing because of specific identifiable deficiencies and specific identifiable damage that can be meaningfully addressed. Your body has a remarkable capacity to respond when given the right support, and now you understand something that most people your age will never learn: what is actually happening inside your nervous system, why it's happening, and what the research says about what can be done. The short presentation in the description below goes even deeper into everything I've covered today: the specific forms of these nutrients, the combinations, the clinical reasoning behind what I've seen work in practice. I highly recommend watching it when you have a quiet moment. If today's video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone you care about, because there are millions of people over 60 dealing with this silently, and they don't have to. Subscribe for more critical health information every week, and leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? I read every single one.